Hey, everybody, this is Nathan, and I'm here with Kim, my wife. Kim, say hi.
Hey, guys.
How are you guys today? This is The Birds and the Lees, and we are continuing with our multi-part, we don't even know how many parts this is going to be, our multi-part series in which we talk about ourselves and where we're from.
Sounds so selfish.
I know, doesn't it? It's like, hey,
Yeah.
you guys want to hear about us? No. Actually, the purpose of this little podcast we're doing is we really want to be able to share from our experiences in ministry and hopefully build a connection with people who are in similar situations, and so they can understand, hey, you know what, we're all going through it, and maybe there's some possibility and open doors for interaction. But in order for us to get to that point, we thought maybe you guys should understand where we're coming from. So it's not out of a narcissistic need for, hey, hear how cool we are, because there's a lot of this that is not cool. But to see how, your story impacts down the road, and the things that happen definitely shape who you are. You would agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people need a little bit of history from all parts of our lives to understand why it's such a passion of ours to help people in ministry, whether they're going into it, coming out of it, or in the middle of it.
Yeah, exactly. So last episode, we talked about your part 2, which was a lot of your college years and your amazingly awesome story of your run-in with the federal marshals and a boyfriend and who was a criminal and everything. And so it's been 2 weeks. And so the next person who gets to go is me. And I guess I'm talking about my college years. And I may have already covered some of this because I didn't go back and listen to our previous episode about me. So if we do,
I'm pretty sure you stopped right at high school.
Okay, well, we'll get into it. So where do I even begin? I guess college, right?
So you had a lot of jumping around. So as far as from college to college and where you landed?
Well, not a lot, actually. So like you, actually, growing up in the DFW area, I actually went to University of North Texas for a while. Originally, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was one of those kids, smart kid in high school, but didn't really work hard. So my grades were okay. I wasn't going to get into any Ivy League. I wasn't going to be heading. I mean, honestly, I wasn't even going to go to like University of Texas or Texas A&M. I couldn't get in there. But at the same time, there was a lot of immaturity, and my dad suggested that I take a semester off and just work. Well, I had this job at a movie theater, and in our little town of Highland Village, Flower Mound, Louisville. And so I decided I was going to, continue to work in the movie theater. I was actually the projection manager, which was a great job because I'd come into work every day. I was working 40 hours a week, and I don't remember if I was putting any money away. I don't think so. I did buy my first car at this time. It was a $500 car. It was a Pontiac 6000. It was some guy's corporate car. So it ran. That's all I needed. And so I'm working in the movie theater. I made a lot of friends there. Made some friends that probably weren't the best influence on me. But spent a semester just working, putting money away for school, and it was fun. I love movies, and so being able to sit upstairs in a projection booth where you work a 10-hour shift, you're only really working about 3 hours. Was good, and it allowed me just to kind of get some of that out of I felt like get some of that out of my system, some of that immaturity out of my system. What I'm going to find out is it wasn't quite all gone.
I think we all felt that way going into college,
I think we all
right?
felt that way. But so I actually started college a semester after everybody who I graduated with, pretty much. And so I started at University of North Texas in the spring and took the basic courses and pretty much almost flunked out. I think I had a 1.5 grade point average at the end of the semester. I actually I failed workbook math, not because I was not good at math, but because I just didn't do it. And I'm not good at math, but I should have been able to pass that one. I remember I missed an entire history exam because I just didn't get out of bed. Yeah, I didn't get out of bed and forgot there was an exam. I was skipping classes all the time. If they gave you a allowable number of classes, I took them all.
You were right on the edge.
I was right on the edge of that.
Yeah.
I mean, for being someone who later, graduated with an English degree, my writing teacher hated me. He told me I was the worst writer he'd ever seen. And, so, it was just one of those things that the first semester, while it was fun, and I did have a lot of fun, I think, I had friends who went there. We carpooled together, and it was, it was just something that we enjoyed. It just was not a good year. Now, I was able to come back the next year. And I think the thing I hated the most was like classes where you went to class and then you had a lab that you had to go to, because it's like, I've already been in the class once. Why do I need to keep going back? Because the labs are like one day at the stupidest time.
Right.
And I just want to be out with my friends. I just want to be back in my town. I guess I'm more of a homebody. So
you don't say.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a homebody. So I want to be there. I don't necessarily want to be at school. And it's a commuter school, so I'm 30 minutes away. It's not like I think if I was living on campus, it would have been a different story, or at least living closer.
Nah.
No, it was, because we'll get to that. It would have been. So, the next semester was better. I did pretty good, going forward. I started to, I wasn't like killing it, but I was at least getting, 3s, 3.0s, things like that,
right.
3.5s. I had a couple of good semesters. At this time I started working. We had gone to summer camp in Colorado when I was in high school, and I loved it. So my senior year, I found out that the camp director had been kind of watching all the senior guys, kind of scouting who his next counselors would be, kind of how we handled situations and what kind of character we had. And so I applied and I got hired at this camp in Colorado. It's Horn Creek, in case anybody wonders. And so I got my first camp counselor job. It was about a month. You go out for 4 weeks in July. I loved it. I always look forward to it because I got to go out for a month in Colorado, which is awesome. You're staying up in the mountains. It's beautiful weather. You get to hang out with kids. And that's kind of where I started. I'd always thought maybe I would want to go into ministry. I had a great youth pastor. And when we moved to Texas, we talked about I had gotten myself in trouble, and really when I moved to Texas is when I really started growing, I think. And part of that was just, this interest in maybe going into student ministry at some point.
Right.
And I think the camp thing was what really got me going on that. And so, in between coming home, going to school, it was pretty low key. I didn't date in high school. I didn't really date. I had my first real girlfriend at this time in college, and she was a friend of one of my friends, and we were pretty serious.
And her first name was?
I'm not going to give her first name because we said we will protect the anonymity of everyone. But she's really awesome.
Yeah.
It wasn't one of those situations where it was unhealthy or toxic or anything. She's great.
Right.
Very loving, caring person. My parents really, really liked her. And at this time, I'm kind of having this restlessness of what I want to do. And I decide, and this may be a little bit before I started dating this girl, but I made up this crazy notion with a couple other of the girls at our church that we were going to move to Colorado because we love it so much out there, and like rent a house and live in it. Just like a Three's Company situation. It was just bizarre.
Yeah.
We thought this would be a good idea. And I remember all the parents are kind of in an uproar, but I'm the oldest one out of them. They're my brother's age.
You're the mature one.
I'm the mature one. So I got about 3 years, and I'm all in on this. And my dad sits me down, and he's like, you really think this is a great... And he never said no. That was the thing. He never said, don't go. He just said, he helped me think through it.
The words of wisdom.
Yeah, you really think this is a good idea? He said, if you really want to go somewhere, why don't you just go out to Lubbock and go to Texas Tech? That's where some of your friends are going to be going. Why don't you just do that? And I went, oh, you know what? I've never been to Lubbock. I've heard of it, and I've heard you don't ever want to go there. But I knew Texas Tech was a school, but I never knew anything about it. So I go out there and I visit. I love it. I fall in love with it immediately. It was awesome. It was an 11-hour drive because the road's iced over. It's only 5 hours. You don't know, it's only 5 hours to Lubbock. It took 11 because the road's iced over on my first trip out there. And so we get out there. I fall in love with the school. And I said, this is where I want to go. I go back and I tell these two girls, like, look, we're too young to be doing this. And, kind of call that off. And the parents really appreciated that I did that. I kind of became a hero a little bit in my own mind. So I move out to Lubbock, and I think that was probably the moment where I think I really started to kind of grow up. I mean, I still did a lot of stupid stuff.
Right.
But this girl and I were dating, and, it's one of the biggest regrets of my entire life because she's super sweet. She's really awesome. But as we started to get more and more serious, and I think a lot of us did this in the 90s growing up as church kids. I didn't know necessarily where she was spiritually. And so, but she's starting to kind of listen and hear, my dad is talking with her or my mom, and she's kind of starting to hear what we believe. And there's this little bit, I won't say like blatant evangelism, but at least like, hey, she's starting to hear a little bit more about the gospel, and she seems at least amenable to listening. I don't think she wasn't an atheist. She wasn't, anything like that. She was listening. But then I got it in my head. It was like, okay, if we get married and she doesn't believe, and all that garbage,
right?
I made a big, huge mistake, and I broke up with her over the phone. It was, because of this panic. And I look back on that, and I do regret that, because it hurt her enough that I think that turned her off to, I don't know if it turned her off completely, but I know at least it was just at the very, very, and it's not even, I don't want to minimize it. I mean, I hurt her, and I didn't want to do that.
Right.
And I hurt her really bad. And so I don't think you're listening, but I'm sorry. I was wrong. So, to this day, it's something that I regret tremendously. But, we got past that. And this was my first year. I'm living on campus. And I'm like 21. Like, everybody's kind of moved off, right? They're living off site, and I move in, and I'm on campus. Okay. And so it's this weird thing, because I can't afford to have my own apartment. And we're talking about the cost of school. And my dad goes, well, you know what? I'll make you a deal. He said, you should be an RA. And I knew the resident advisors on the floor. I was like, I don't want to do this job. But he goes, but you get free room and board.
Right.
And you get a free meal plan.
Yep.
And he goes, if you will try to get that job, I'm going to feel more comfortable about paying tuition, because it's a lot for you to live on campus.
Right.
And I had a job at the time. I worked in the dining hall, which was terrible. It was a horrible job. But so I apply for the RA job, and I don't get it.
Right.
And looking back on hindsight, I realized that probably the part of the reason why I didn't get it was I was very explicitly talking about my faith. And
right.
Yeah, and so you come across a certain way, and maybe I was a little bit too aggressively, like, I would do this and that, and so I didn't get the job right away. And so I was pretty bummed out. We were trying to figure out. I had I signed up for a room for the next year and everything. And it's the day I'm moving out to go back home, and I get a call from the director of one of the buildings, and she offers me a position. So she said, the previous guy dropped out. We would like you. You were next in line. Would you come? I agree to become an RA. And ultimately, being an RA ends up being like the greatest job I had in college. I loved it. We and I found out, and I think I had a really good reputation with the staff, and it was fun, and I made a lot of good friendships. In fact, it's interesting that one of our friends now, that I got to work with years and years and years later at a church, turns out that they lived in that building, or at least her husband did, and was a couple floors down at the same time. So I was an RA when we were all in school together. We didn't even realize it, which is kind of funny and really cool. So I do the RA thing, and I'm getting this English degree, and I'm about ready to graduate. I've had a couple of girlfriends while I'm there. One of them was not good and very toxic and very unhealthy, and one of them really was again another one of these where she is a great girl. She is it was a great fun time dating. But I'm getting ready to graduate. And so it's kind of like, okay, so I'm graduating. She's younger than me. She's going to be in there a while. And I'm making up my mind, and I'm thinking, how am I going to get a job in a school teaching when my boss calls me in and she says, you don't need to be a teacher. And of course, somebody says that, what's your first thought? Your first thought is, oh, I'm terrible, right? I'm not going to be a good teacher. She said, you don't need to be a teacher because it would kill you to have to send the students home every day. She said, you want to be around them all the time.
Right.
She says, you actually care and you really want to be around them. So she said, you need to go be a hall director. It's like, what? I'm looking at her going, your job? She's like, yeah. So I go, so I think about it, and I decide that that's what I want to do. Because it feels like at this time, one of the things that's going on is my friends are involved in college ministries. I'm a little bit on the periphery of this college ministry because the RA job took a lot of time. And they're getting to be leaders and stuff and start to get plugged into ministry. They're getting to volunteer and chaperone and all this kind of stuff. And I'm starting to get really frustrated because I feel like that's what I really want to do. But it felt like every time that door felt like it was opening, it would get slammed shut.
Right.
And And so I'm starting to get super frustrated and very discouraged. And so when she tells me this, it's almost like, okay, somebody recognizes something that I'd never considered. And so this might be the first time someone outside my family is sitting there saying, this is what you're good at. And so I go off to this. So I decided to take a chance on it. I go off to this job fair in Oshkosh, Wisconsin in the middle of winter, which, let me tell you, that's a garden spot in the middle of winter. And I interview with a bunch of schools, University of Alaska, all these different places, place in Kansas and whatnot. And I get this interview with this school in Statesboro, Georgia, called Georgia Southern. And the guy who's doing the interview had been on staff at Texas Tech when I first became an RA. So I actually knew who he was, and I think I'd met him a couple times. And so it feels like there's an in. And so we go through the whole process, and then right before graduation, they offer me a job. They offered me a job to come move to Statesboro, Georgia, and run a dorm, or I'm sorry, residence hall.
Right.
Yeah. So to run this residence hall, and I get to work with students, and it's going to be a freshman one. So I get to work with students who are coming straight out of high school, which sounds really cool, but it's a little bit nerve-wracking. One, because I've never been there. I didn't actually do an interview on site at the school. They did all their interviews by phone or in Oshkosh, and so I accept the job. And I remember talking to my dad saying, I don't know if this is the right decision. I don't know what happens if I fail. And he basically just said, do you feel like you will come out of this growing? And I went, yeah. He goes, then go do it.
Right.
He goes, as long as you make a decision, he goes, I back you on it.
Right.
And so they're also offering me a reduced price graduate degree as part of the job package. So it's kind of silly not to. And it's a higher education administration degree. And I remember that last summer, and I think this is going to end up being another part talking about grad school, because a lot happens. A lot happens in that time. Because if I think I've grown in this time in college, which I have, and I've made some friends, this is kind of like what you talk about in the previous episode with the boyfriend.
Yeah.
I went out to Georgia Southern thinking that this was like the promised land kind of thing. Like, my career is taking off. This is what I'm going to do. It sounds awesome. And, we often get sidetracked, right? And at the same time, I'm still struggling because I feel like all my friends are getting to go off and do the thing that I wanted to.
Right.
But as I'm going to find out later, I think sometimes what happens is God takes the long road.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And this is going to be my long road.
Yeah.
And I do want to talk a little bit more about that particular experience in detail, because it's the lowest point in my life. If I had to pick a lowest point in my life, it would probably be that, though there have been some low points since.
Right.
But I think that was the one that was probably the hardest.
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that people in ministry coming out of any sort of college, whether you go to DTS or whether you go to a mainstream college and want to go into ministry has changed since you have come out.
Oh, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I would say it's 4 times harder to get on your feet, find a good job, and just get started. Someone that will help you to start growing into that position. And so sometimes my heart aches for these guys coming out of college wanting to go into ministry, and knowing that what we went through trying to find a ministry job was half as hard as what they go through right now.
Yeah. And I think what ends up happening is, and again, I'll get into detail on this, is the experience of what I did in housing gave me a perspective that was a little bit different than what the guys who were getting into ministry at the time that I eventually did.
Yeah, absolutely.
I experienced things that they had not.
But I think that was good.
It was good, and I ultimately think that, and we'll get into that. But I think there's this idea that you're looking for God's will, and when it's very, very clear, then it'll happen. Maybe it still is His will that you go do this, but He's got to take you because He sees ultimately the things you need and where you need to grow.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what ends up happening in this next part we're going to talk about. This is the growth period. This is the kick in the teeth.
Yep.
And this is the thing that's going to shape pretty much everything going forward for the last 29 years of my life, right?
And just to leave a little bit of a hint at what is to come, it involves a girl.
Well,
that is not me.
It involves several girls, but it also involves a lot of other stuff too. So.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, all right. Well, thank you for joining us. This is a kind of a crash course in our lives. So there's so much more there, and we appreciate you guys listening. Appreciate you continuing to listen if you are. Once again, you can reach us at thepodcastingleads@gmail.com if you have ideas, input, insight. We'd love to hear from you. Again, we're looking at down the road putting a Patreon out, just a kind of a digital tip, if so to speak, if you want to encourage us or help us take this thing kind of to the next level, which we'd love to do. So until next time, this is Nathan.
And this is Kim.
And we look forward to spending time with you again. Bye.